Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Tuam and today I'm going to talk with Dr. Farid Holakouee about mood disorders. So now I'm waiting for him to join the chat. Yes, there he is. Send the request. Hello Dr. Farid.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. What about you?
Good, thank you. Let me see how I can set up things. My camera, I'm not really in the shot so much. There we go, a little bit better. Nice to see you
Yeah.
again.
Yeah, it's very nice to see you too. Last time, unfortunately, we lost the video. It was an interesting conversation.
Yes,
Uh,
more of a interview. This time it seems like you had a topic in mind you wanted to discuss about mood disorders. So I guess I'm lucky that you had some technical difficulties and couldn't save it last time because I get to talk to you again.
I'm actually the lucky one, Dr.
Oh,
Farid. So, how would you like to start it? Maybe you can talk about what is the disorder, first of all.
well, this is an interesting topic when you ask me about mood disorders. Because of course something like uh, depression or bipolar disorder used to be called manic depressive disorder, but now it's called bipolar disorder. They are very serious issues, so I'm going to try to add some perspective to it, but I don't want to undermine how serious depression is. And maybe if we have time we could talk about, for example, the difference between sadness and depression, because sometimes people think it's the same thing because we use
Sure.
I'm feeling so depressed. Really, they might mean I'm just sad right now or going through something. But I also want to add a perspective that when we think of these disorders, even using that word disorder at times, we have to be aware that it's putting a certain label on it. And there is some indication or theories that some of these things we consider just disorders might actually have some benefits or meaning other than, usually when we think of some kind of illness, we just think of getting rid of it as the only thing that matters. Whereas with some what we consider mental disorders, it's good to have a perspective to recognize there might actually be some meaning or benefit to them. And so that's where it becomes this interesting conversation where, although we can say something like depression might have some meaning, that we don't want to just get rid of it. At the same time, I don't want to ignore that depression can be a very debilitating disorder that also leads to even things like suicide potentially. So it's not something we can just ignore and say, okay, depression is all good now. We don't have to think about it at all. But it's something important to look at this distinction that sometimes we think of something that feels bad in the moment has to be bad when there could be more to it than that. And that's something that I brought up, I think, last time with you as well, but it's something on my show I talk about a lot, is this understanding that like sad feelings are not bad feelings, or these negative emotions that we think about, they also have some meaning and information. And if we ignore them or just think there's something to get rid of or something to get rid of in our loved ones, we miss a big part of being human and a big part of understanding ourselves too. So I know that was maybe a mouthful, but just to give maybe a full perspective of different aspects of this situation, that mental illness is a very real thing that harms people, but also the way we look at what people go through mentally and emotionally is sometimes skewed to think that anything that doesn't feel good needs to quickly be gotten rid of, and we don't even need to understand it, whereas we always want to try to understand what we're going through. So I'll let you kind of also share what your thoughts are. And I looked up, and to be honest, it was hard for me to understand because I think it's based on some mathematical theories that I don't understand. But I tried to look at some of your research that you've done on mood disorders and looking at systems and mathematical models and how they might be implicated or can give us some information on depression, mood disorders, and their treatment.
Yeah, the conversation for today, it was interesting for me because your PhD is in clinical psychology, and my research is about quantitative psychology. And when we talk about mood disorders, maybe our perspectives could be different in some angles, and that's why it's very interesting to talk about it.
Yeah.
And as a clinical psychologist, for example, what would you think about modeling, for example, something like depression or anxiety or something like that? So the question also I wanted to ask, since you mentioned about sadness as sad emotion, How would you distinguish between mood and emotion in clinical psychology?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people have written about that. One analogy that I like is sometimes people will say emotion or feeling is like the weather, and mood is more like the climate. So it's more of a bigger type of thing. So, you could have, and this actually, and I don't want to get into a conversation about climate change, but sometimes people say, oh, look, it's cold today, so there's no global warming or something like that, when climate is a much more complex type of a thing. And so mood is the same thing. It's a bigger type of kind of how you feel over, it could be even hours or weeks, or days or weeks. It could be a period of time, whereas emotion or feeling is more about in that moment how you're feeling. So right now you could have a feeling, and your mood is likely going to affect your feeling. So if you're in a depressed mood, you're more likely to go towards sad feelings, feeling negative, feeling down on yourself, feeling hopeless. But you can feel happy, and that's actually what sometimes surprises people. They'll say, how could that person be depressed? I saw them laughing the other day. I get that a lot from parents. They say, no, he can't be depressed because when his friends were over, he was laughing and having a good time. And so being depressed doesn't mean pure sadness all the time. It means that your overall mood is going to be towards sad, or those types of experiences, but it doesn't mean you won't ever feel good or feel happy during that period. I think it's important for people to recognize in themselves and in others, because sometimes people think, oh, maybe I'm not depressed because I feel good today. Or I'll hear people say I'm bipolar. They think they're bipolar because they're probably depressed, but they got happy for a little while, but then went back to sadness. And they think that means they're bipolar, when it's not actually what bipolar is. Bipolar is more the mood of being very down and being manic, being up, experience mania, not just some moments, we could say, of being happy.
I see. So in this case, clinical psychology and quantitative psychology are in line, so they don't have any disagreement about that definition for sure. And how do you measure it? For example, how do you measure the mood of your patients?
Yeah, that thing, I think this is where I could imagine mathematical models having a challenge, is because things like depression are very hard to measure or really say this is depression or it's not depression. We have the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, that's made by the American Psychiatric Association. There's the ICD, which is international, and they're usually symptoms, and you have kind of like a symptom checklist. So if you have 5 out of 9, you could be diagnosed with something. But depression is very different than something that you can just say checklists. And also, there's different types of depression. Some people, when they're depressed, they sleep less. Some people, they sleep more. Some people, they eat less and have less appetite. Some people eat more when they're feeling depressed. And different types of feelings. Some people have hopelessness. Some people don't. So another issue that we might find in studying something as complex as depression, or even maybe something that might be many different disorders or issues that we're labeling as one thing, major depressive disorder, for example, that could lead to issues in the research, because we might find that there are people, we might lump all the people into one group, and that could blur what's going on. So that's one of the things I think is very challenging with doing research, and what the mathematical modeling, let's say, is that we still don't have such a clear way to for sure say these people are depressed, these people are not. And so that makes it a hard starting point, of course, where you can't define the problem or define what you're looking at. That does really create a challenge there to define. So depression, of course, I do look at the symptom checklist, but if I'm getting to know my client, even if they might have 4 of them, let's say, but not 5, you might still think that they're depressed, or would want to give them that type of a diagnosis because of how, let's say, severe it is. So the symptom checklists are helpful, but they can also be limiting if we only think that's what depression is. So it's a very complex issue. It's one of those things where depression is definitely real, but defining it or knowing when you see it is not so easy to say, and that's kind of, I think, part of the nature of psychological issues is they are so complex that it makes it hard to study them in that same way. But of course, people are doing it. I know you're even doing that in your way of applying a different perspective or a different discipline looking at psychology. And I think that's very important. But we have to be aware of the complexity of what we're dealing with, is that it's hard to just say, you know, there's no blood test to say someone is depressed to know for sure.
Yeah, that's right. And for quantitative psychology, we usually divide, or better to say, partition mood into pleasure and arousal. But we are oversimplifying things, as you said. So this is not correct exactly to do these things, but
Right.
it shed light anyway on the matter
Hmm.
somehow. It could
Now,
be helpful.
sorry, I
Yeah,
didn't mean, when you say pleasure and arousal, is that kind of like, so sometimes when people even look at feelings, we can say they can have a positive or a negative feeling, and then the valence, like the intensity, is that kind of the two, it's similar?
exactly, exactly.
And I've seen that more for also emotions, but I guess you could extend that to mood. I guess I could understand that extension. And it is, you know, it's basic, but it's very um, meaningful at the same time, because, you know, people think of feelings as these big things, emotions as these big things, but we have feelings all the time and to everything. You know, I even have a feeling to you, right? When I see your face, it's going to bring up something within me. And interestingly, I probably feel something different this time about you than I did last time. Maybe I feel more comfortable with you, more connected. So we see that our emotions about things can change. I have a cup here. I have probably feelings about my cup. Everything in my office brings up feelings. Even just being in my office brings up a feeling within me. So we're constantly having these feelings. That's why I think it's funny when people say, oh, I'm not emotional, or I don't have a lot of feelings. It's not that they don't have, it's that they're not connected to them, or they're not aware of them. It's kind of like your temperature. We always have a temperature. I'm not good at converting, but in Fahrenheit, it's like 98.6 degrees is like the range, right? And you always have one, but you're not aware of it. People might become aware of it when you have a fever, when it gets really hot, or maybe they get really cold. And so for a lot of people, their emotions are the same way. They're not aware of them until they become really big. Um, and so it's one of the main goals you have in therapy is you're actually helping people connect to their feelings more. And that's why we say therapy a lot of times, it's not just about fixing things, it's much more about self-awareness. So now it's like, I'm aware that, oh, I've been feeling sad, or I have some anger about this, or I have some that. And you can process it and deal with it in therapy as well. But a big part is creating a stronger connection between yourself and your own feelings.
Yeah, and you mentioned about feelings. Again, scientists have problem about distinguishing feeling with emotion, for example, because we can feel hunger, for example, feeling
Right.
hungry. Then
Yeah.
this is more physical then.
Yeah, and then, you know, there's, you know, feeling, it could be, emotion is kind of like, uh it could be a physical sensation and a mental, you know, connection. Some people, you know, that you're right, these definitions, it's very fine grained. It's important, of course, I'm sure in your work also, that if you you need to define your terms and know what you're working with. But when it comes to psychology, these things become very challenging, because it's hard to say, well, is it just the feeling, like physical sensation? Is it the mental? Is it both of them together if you're not aware of them? You know, and they do all sorts of studies where they just measure the physical sensations, because they know people might not realize they're stressed or feeling something, but they pick up on, you know, the skin, if it's sweating a little bit, and, you know, heart rate, those kinds of things. For example, they'll do, you know, husband and wife will be fighting, and this is kind of stereotypical, but oftentimes men do something called stonewalling. Women do it too. In Persian culture, it's part of being ghar, you could say, which both men and women might do. But, you know, you're having an argument, and then the man, you know, he just turns on the TV and is not even looking at his wife anymore, and the wife is still talking. And of course, to the wife, what it looks like, and really the experience, is he doesn't care. He's just watching TV now. He doesn't even care about me. He doesn't care about our fight. But when they do these studies and they measure the man's physiology, they see his heart rate is like super fast, you know, like 120 beats per minute. So it's not actually that he doesn't care. He's actually overwhelmed with emotion. And this is his way of dealing with it, is to shut down and try to avoid it. Of course, it can be very, very painful for the partner to feel like your partner's turning away from you and you're still having all these feelings. But having that awareness, both for both partners, can be meaningful to recognize, okay, it's not that I don't care, I actually care so much. And the partner can say, it's not that he doesn't care about me, he actually is getting overwhelmed. And that's why we want to take a break and say, okay, like, let's let you calm down, because when you're that activated physiologically, you're not going to be able to really have a meaningful conversation. You'll need to calm back down again. So it's just interesting because it shows us that a lot of times we're not aware of what we are feeling. And it's surprising because obviously you're in your head, I'm in my head, whatever that really means. I should be able to know, but we see that people very often aren't. And it happens in therapy where you'll ask someone, how are you feeling? And they say, I don't know. And sometimes I'll joke and say, well, who do you think I should ask? You know, because they're really the only one that can know that. But we can see how disconnected we can oftentimes feel from our own feelings.
Yeah, and people in the comments, they are saying about treatments, but we will get there. First, we are talking about the diagnosis and how to model it, and then for sure we will talk about treatments a little as well.
Sounds
And I wanted to also ask you about this thing because this is very interesting for me. I already told you about that two-dimensional thing that we are doing in quantitative psychology. For example, when pleasure and arousal is high, very high, we have manic trait. When, for example, pleasure is high, but I will talk about it later. Pleasure is low and arousal is high, we have anxiety.
mm-hmm.
When both pleasure and arousal is very low, we have depression. But in clinical psychology, we don't have such a case that pleasure is high and arousal is very low. And I had a proposal named pleasant laziness, and
Uh-huh.
I called this is a mood disorder. But
I,
in clinical psychology, we
yeah,
don't have such a term. So
I,
how about you think about it?
I saw your abstract. That's interesting. Yeah, I saw the abstract on the paper you wrote on that last night, and it was interesting. And I hadn't heard that term before. But you're right; it's something to look at. And I think it also gets to, again, exploring what we're talking about. When we just think of disorders, then we think we don't have to look at the rest, but we have like these certain labels. And if it's, but I don't know, that you said pleasance laziness. Is that what it's called? What
Yes.
you're Yeah, I mean, maybe that could lead to people not being as engaged in their life and feeling okay, maybe feeling like it's okay, but they're not really engaged with their own life, which is something you see a lot. And people, through things like social media, I mean, people always had some ways to do this, but there's ways that they can just stay in this like comfort zone where they might feel pleasant or might feel okay in the moment. My, this is kind of my view, is that usually somewhere deeper they're not happy with the situation. Their mood wouldn't be happy, maybe, or overall feeling wouldn't be good, maybe in the moment. And I think this is one of the problems when people are trying to chase feeling good, and that's why I talk about it so much. If you only chase feeling good in the moment, you're going to make very bad decisions. You're not going to live a very fulfilling life. You're not going to work hard on a lot of things. You're not going to work hard in your relationship because, okay, we can have an argument that might be good for our relationship, or we can just watch Netflix and have a good time and forget about everything. Most people, if it's just about in the moment, you're going to choose the Netflix and distraction. And that's kind of maybe what that pleasant laziness is like constantly living in a state of distraction, of avoidance, not facing our actual what's going on. And that's why I really try to shift this perspective that feeling like quote unquote bad is not something bad or something we should avoid. It's the most healthy thing we can do is to let ourselves feel bad or face the thing that's making us feel bad. And I especially try to talk to parents about this. So I call something the pain prevention philosophy of parenting, which is a lot of parents just think my job is to make sure my kid doesn't feel any pain or sadness at every moment, rather than realizing that when someone is growing and developing, we actually need them to face the real life challenges that life gives us to help them grow. So we have to differentiate between pain that is damage and pain that is growth. Pain that is damage is hurting us. Just like if you're exercising, you might tear your muscles or your ligaments or something. That's not good pain when we say no pain, no gain. But if your muscles are having the healthy microscopic tears that leads to growth, it might hurt, but it might be pain that's going towards growth, which is good. So we have to be very mindful of this, that when we're looking at our feelings, and not just think, I only should do the things that feel good. I should never do anything that feels bad, because that leads to a very unfulfilled life.
Yes, and what is problematic about having pleasant laziness is that Because some clinical psychologists say that's fine because that guy is happy, he's having high pleasure, it is okay. But the fact is that we know that when we have, for example, depression, this is more probable that we will have anxiety too.
Hmm.
And if we have depression, maybe it has a high chance we will have bipolar situation too. So
Yeah, I mean,
that's, yeah.
yeah, I mean, getting into bipolar, it's usually it's hard to make. Yeah, it's possible, but I think you're right. It's, you know, to me, life isn't just about feeling good in the moment. A good life, that's not what I would want for someone. You know, for you, Dr. Mani, I don't want you to just feel pleasure and feel okay. I would love for you to do meaningful work, for you to face challenges. And for myself and for anyone, it means, or if you're connected to the world, you know, if we're connected to the world, you know, I don't want to get into the political issues, but there was the execution of a young man in Iran yesterday. And if you are connected to what's going on, that should make you sad, you know. And if you're not connected to what's happening in the world, you won't feel sad. But if you want to actually be connected to the world, to other people, if you care about someone, you have feelings if something good or bad happens to them. Or the world. So yeah, we can't just think feeling good means health. I think that's my concern, is sometimes that mindset that yes, overall, you know, I talk about being content and fulfilled more than happy, because happy people think of just in the moment, even though you can define happiness differently. But for me, I would want for people to live a fulfilling life, a life they feel content when they look back. I doubt someone will look back in their life and be like, you know what, I always sat in my room and felt good. That was a really good life. That they're not going to think that. They'll feel good about their life if they're doing meaningful things, which involves facing some unpleasant feelings as well.
Yes, I totally agree with you. And some people, as you said, they think if they are happy at that moment, the problem is already fixed. Or some people may use drug, and
Hmm.
at that moment they are happy,
Yeah,
but it doesn't mean they don't have a disorder.
that's right. Exactly.
And it has a threshold. When they increase their dopamine for just a period of time, it doesn't mean again next time you can reach it easily. You need more drug after that to reach that level of dopamine. That's a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of in life, anything that's a quick fix, we should be a little skeptical of it. You know, if someone is sad, it makes you happy. You know, just like with depression, if someone says you're very depressed and you're going to be so happy tomorrow, that would make me skeptical. It's like if someone said you broke your leg, I can make it so you're running tomorrow. I would hope people are like, okay, that sounds good, but also scary, because it makes me feel like there's a lot of healing that's not happening. Something unnatural is happening there. And so a lot of people, they deal with their negative feelings in that way. How do we get rid of them? And one of the biggest markers of mental health, in my opinion, is actually our tolerance for negative feelings. When you feel sad, when you feel down, can you handle it? And that's something, again, we want to show our kids that, okay, you're sad, it's okay. We're not going to just quickly try to take it away as soon as possible, no matter what it takes. It's okay if you're sad. I'm here for you. It doesn't feel good, but I'm here to help you to then slowly feel better over time. But it's not something really scary or bad we have to get rid of. And the same thing. So you're sad. Rather than looking for some escape, understand your sadness. Actually go into your sadness. Don't run away from it. And in that sadness, there's usually a lot of meaning. You can understand more about yourself. There's a depth to it that is very, very important, that I think people often miss, because they think the goal of life is just to be smiling and feel happy all the time, you know.
Yeah, and for this topic, there's a Hollywood movie named Inside, if I'm not mistaken, and it's an animation. It exactly
Oh,
shows that. Yeah, you know that movie, right?
in, out, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Inside Out.
out. It's
Out.
like out, yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, so it exactly shows that how we need sadness and how we need sad emotion in our life so that we will have balance.
Hmm. Absolutely, yeah. In that character, I think Riley was the name of the main character, and then her happiness, like, it was really interesting. I think it was voiced by Amy Poehler. She did a great job. Always like wants to be happy, 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 and then thought that was the only thing that mattered. And then she realized that some of these very meaningful moments in her life was when she was sad. People saw her sadness and gave her the support that she needed. So expressing sadness can be very important to those around you, allowing them to know you need help, allowing them to understand you better, leading to social connection, and all these important things. So I thought, yeah, I actually really loved that movie. I saw it a few times because I think it did a good job of showing that it's not just about feeling good It's about actually all the emotions have value. That's why we have them. And also that most things have some mix to them. You know, sometimes we think something makes you just happy, but it's not just about feeling good. Sometimes you have an emotion, you might have, well, I like this, but this part of it makes me sad. Usually it's a blend of different feelings, not pure happiness, pure sadness. And so we saw her memories, they used to be these pure feelings, and then they blended to different colors to show that, you know, actually you might have a memory that it was kind of sad, but then it led to you connecting to your loved one. So it has some happiness or something else in it as well. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting movie. You know, a lot of these animated movies, they're quote unquote directed for kids, but I think adults can get a lot out of it as well.
Yeah, it was a clever movie.
Yes.
And they are asking what's the topic. The topic is mood disorder. And I also wanted to talk about this pleasant laziness, that how much chance does it have to be considered as a mood disorder? Because when I shared the idea with clinical psychologists, as I told you, some of them totally disagree, but some of them got very excited that, yes, we totally neglected that one. So the problem I had was that because I'm not dealing with patients, I'm dealing with the students, and it needs a professional psychologist to diagnose them with depression. As you said, we cannot mix up sadness with depression,
Yeah.
because the students may say, okay, I have depression, but this is not the case.
Right.
So what do you suggest me to reach the data from patients? Because I
Yes.
need exactly this measurement on them, not the way that they usually classically do that.
Well, I mean, the thing is, you're also saying it might not be depression, so you don't need to necessarily get people that are depressed. That pleasant laziness, you know. So usually, when we look at a mental disorder, it has to cause the person, you know, some kind of significant harm or distress, like they don't feel good, or those around them. You know, because you might be, let's say, someone has antisocial personality disorder, they might feel okay about it, but they might go harm other people and look at them as just tools to get whatever they want. So you'd have to probably show how does it cause dysfunction in their life. And what's challenging is what you're kind of even saying is that the people, while they're in it, feel good. They feel okay. Or at least it seems like on the surface. I think deeper, they don't feel good. So it's hard. That's one aspect that could make it challenging to make it what, like a quote unquote disorder, is that you have to show somehow that it's causing dysfunction in some, you know, their, well, you could say maybe in their working life, because they might not work or be active, so it could lead to dysfunction in that area. I would also be open, you know, I get what you're saying about making it a disorder, but you might not have to just go the disorder route. It might just be about identifying this aspect of human experience. And
Maybe
so
just a trait, like
like
manic. Yeah.
like or yeah, even just like, you know, writing about it. So it might not have to just be a disorder. I think the part that I think is good is that recognizing that something that feels good might be bad for you. That's kind of what manic, you know, being manic can be. Of course, in the extremes, it really is. But people, you know, sometimes when you hear the symptoms of mania, it's like lack of a need of sleep, inflated self-esteem, euphoric mood. You're like, that sounds really good. But it's really, you know, it's like on overdrive. It's not good. You know, they make bad decisions. They are very selfish. They don't think about other people. They do really risky behaviors. And they can feel really agitated and restless. So it's not a good thing, even though some of it sounds like what people might be striving for. I want to have, you know, even when you think of pop psychology, a lot of times what I see is it's almost like people want to be manic. I want to feel good all the time, have energy all the time, feel like I'm amazing and better than everyone else. All these types of things that actually are not healthy. But I think sometimes people think that's what they're going for, which I think is one of the problems we have when it comes to our mental health, is people are searching for the wrong things. They're not even searching for what I think is real mental health, which is much more of a stable, you're going to have ups and downs, but it's not this inflated sense of self, this inflated mood, and it gets people in trouble because of that. But going back to your question, I think it's an interesting aspect of human experience to write about and to look at. Whether or not it could be labeled a disorder, that's a, you know, and even like I said, disorders, people have a, you know, there's a lot of stigma about that too, of labeling people. But I do think it's actually a big issue in society where people are very happy not doing much or think they are. Again, I think when I even say it, it doesn't ring true to me because I think deep down they don't feel fulfilled and good about their life. But it's an interesting thing to look at, that just because someone feels good, you know, could feel numb even or feel okay, that doesn't mean they're okay. And then it gets also back to these issues of, well, if they're okay with their life, who are we to say, no, you have to live differently? It's very complex and complicated, but I think it's an interesting aspect. And it's very simple. Like you said, we have something on those other three extremes, low, high. But what about this one? It's an interesting area to look at.
Yeah, exactly. The thing that you mentioned about, for example, someone who has mania, so it shows that he's happy, but it's too much. So it's about intensity. So
Hmm.
when I talk about pleasant laziness, this is very extreme case that that guy is super lazy and he's enjoying it too much. So it's very different from just relaxing. So
Right.
people usually don't distinguish between those two.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a big problem because, as I mentioned, you can easily switch from pleasant laziness to depression as soon as something bad happens in your life. From pleasure, you get some unpleasant emotion, and
Right.
directly you go to depression.
And I think that's that's indicates in the way that there's this lack of really solid foundation in that person. You know, they haven't built up themselves and built up something so that even just a slight wind will knock them over, like you're saying. And that's showing something that I think when you're not living your life and really doing the things that are meaningful to build yourself up, then yeah, one bad type of news or experience might totally knock you down because you haven't built up as much to withstand what happens in life.
Exactly. And we mentioned the movie Inside Out, and in that movie, they showed separate islands as personality traits, which was very interesting.
Yeah.
And how do you distinguish between personality disorder and mood disorder as a clinical psychologist?
Well, you know, what people who have individuals who will have a personality disorder, they'll often have mood issues as well. But the personality disorders, the way one way you classify them is the personality disorders tend to be much more stable. So kind of like personality is more always there, whereas your mood, someone might be depressed for 5 months, get out of it, never get depressed again. And so it could be much more of a transient thing, even though if it lasts a while. Whereas the personality issues usually are more stable. So if someone has borderline personality disorder, now they can get treatment. And in general, we think that it's hard, but they can, you know, things like DBT are around for, let's say, borderline personality disorder, but they are more stable than mood disorders in general. That's one main distinction between them.
Which one is easier to treat usually?
Well, usually the mood disorders, let's say, are easy, or doesn't mean easy, because like I said, even most depressions go away on their own, whereas most personality disorders don't go away even with a lot of therapy and work, you know. So the personality disorders are much more stable and harder to change, whereas yeah, people get depressed, don't even get treatment, might get better, whereas with a personality disorder, change is much harder.
Yeah, dear Sam Golzari is also here. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Sam.
And people were asking in the comments about treatments a lot. And we already know about the common treatments for mood disorders.
Yeah.
But what are the side things that we can do, even without psychotherapy or drug therapy?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of I think therapy is great. Especially therapy is great. Of course, I'm a therapist, so you know they say if you're a hammer, you see everything as a nail. But therapy, I think, is good because, like I was saying, there could be some meaning in, let's say, your depression. So it's not just about let's remove it, let's erase it. There could be something very meaningful. And so when you go to therapy for, let's say, depression, of course, the goal is for you overall to feel better, but in a longer term. So I don't think someone comes in and they're sad, let me cheer them up. And it could even be hard for, as a therapist, especially early on in training, to realize you have to stay with them in that sadness. In a way, it's like imagining someone's in a dark cave. You're not going to just pull them out, but you will go with them into the cave if they want you there. And that itself might make it easier. You know, depression is a very isolating, you feel isolated, which you might even need. So that's why I'm saying if they want to let you in, and slowly you might have them come out over time. But I think that's why therapy can be so important, because it's like looking at it in a deeper way, not just let's cheer you up as soon as possible. So therapy is very good. There's lots of newer treatments too, like ketamine for depression, you know, other types of medications and things that are used. But since you said the non-stereotypical ones, you know, what's interesting is like there's this book called The Upward Spiral by Alex Korb, and in that book he looks at some different things you can do, small things that can have a small but adding impact to improve your mental health or dealing with depression. Things like physical activity, gratitude journal, meditation, those types of things. And it reminds me of, you know, if someone has a heart attack and they say what they should do, usually it's things that are good for anyone, you know, so like exercise, eat, you know, certain types of food, don't eat certain types of foods that even if someone didn't have a heart issue, it'd be good for them. And so a lot of things we would say for depression are good for you would be good really for anyone. You know, meditation is good for everyone. Gratitude journal would be good for pretty much anyone. Socializing is something we all need and would benefit from making sure we have, you know, doing community service, let's say helping others is good for everyone. So it's kind of the same thing, but those are some things people can do, but they would be good for really anyone who's listening right now to do as well.
Yeah, now there are also very simple things that we usually neglect, right? Like, for example, our nutrition, how it can be effective, or even sleeping time. That
Absolutely.
recently I also published an article about the sleeping time. I don't know if you take a look at that one.
8 hours at night, not more than 2 hours during the day, something like that.
Yeah, but it was just for 200 young adults. So it could be totally different from a large target.
Yes. Sleep is such a, I mean, it's been getting more attention, underrated. Even I've been guilty of this. Sometimes people like to show off on how little they sleep. Oh, I only slept 2 hours last night. I only sleep this much. And they show off about how little they need to sleep. And the research is showing how important sleep is, even in adults. A lot of people thought, oh, you know, in adults, maybe you need 5 hours or 6 hours. Some people have different needs, and people are different. I don't want to say everyone's the same, but there's a lot of research showing that even adults need 7.5, 8+ hours a night, ideally, and it has such a big impact on so many areas of your life. So sleep is one of those underrated. It's kind of like sleep is the last thing we do. It's like, okay, I have to do everything. How much time do I have to sleep? And some people say you should do it the other way around. Like, I'm going to sleep this much. Now with the time I have in the day, how can I make everything fit? And sleep is very big when it comes to mood disorders. I mean, we just know, even on a smaller scale, if you don't sleep well, the next day you're more irritable, you get upset more easily, you're more emotional or you get more affected by things than usual, which isn't always bad, but it can feel like you feel a little bit out. The stability is not quite there, even from one night of not sleeping enough. So of course, if we extend that, of course, that's going to be even more impactful.
Exactly. And for those who asked where they can find the video of this conversation, I will post it on Instagram and YouTube, and you can see it for sure after that. If we don't get unlucky like last time, I think it was an exception. Hopefully, it won't
We'll
happen again.
get, you know, just even for my own benefit to see it again. And then Kiana saying Why We Sleep. I've seen that book by Matthew Walker, mentions why we need not less than 7 hours a day. Thank you, Kiana, for sharing that. Yeah, it's just so critical. And you even see a lot of athletes and different people are emphasizing how important sleep is in their regimen to keep them performing at the top level and just for our overall mental health and well-being.
And also, if I'm not mistaken, your father mentioned about at least 7.5 hours you should sleep because of such circles for waves on the brain. He mentioned about that, and I understood, yes, it should be minimum.
Yeah, it's a bit, I think it's, you know, it's something to really consider. Like I said, of course, maybe not everyone has that luxury all the time, but it's something so important to make it a non-negotiable part of your day, you know, that it's not just something that happens, and sleep is so important. So, yeah, I mean, someone's writing about, I'm so lazy and I sleep to avoid life pressures. That's different. Of course, like anything we're talking about, And people, when they are feeling depressed or down, sometimes sleep is a way to avoid what they're facing. It's another form of avoidance. So we do want to be aware of that. So it's not that we're saying the amount of sleep is good, but I think the majority of people don't sleep enough. But you know, we definitely want to make sure if you're sleeping too much, that itself could be a sign of something going on, whether it's biological or psychological.
Dr. Farid, I really enjoy talking with you no matter what's the topic. And
Thank
I really never want to stop our talk, but
Yeah.
I want to wrap it up so that we don't lose the video like the last time.
No, I understand.
And
We went long, and I feel like we're just getting started. I'm really enjoying the conversation, but I understand we got to stop to make sure we don't lose it like last time. But thank you again so much. I'd be more than happy to come on sometime soon. We could talk about whatever you'd like.
thank you very much for your time, Dr. Farid. I really appreciate it. I
Thank
cherish each moment of it. And
you.
I'm looking forward to it. If there will be interesting topic, we can talk about it again. It will be wonderful.
It'd be my pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Farid, and thanks a lot to everyone who joined us for this conversation. See you guys. See you, Dr. Farid.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.